Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest in the Polar Tourism Guides Association Guides Inside talk. Last week we had a nice chat with Graham with some of his buddies. We're going to be a bit more decorous. We've got some grown-ups this evening, and I'm going to be talking with a couple of people from AECO, the Association of Arctic Expedition Cruise Operators. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Pat Lurcock. Some of you may know me. I was a government officer, did administration on South Georgia for about 25 years, and that was fishing and tourism and environmental stuff. And then the last 3 or 4 years, I've been working as a guide on the cruise ships, both north and south, and very much enjoying it. And I've also been roped in onto the advisory board of the PTGA, and hence I get to come along, see you all tonight. And very, very big welcome to Frigg Jørgensen and Troels Jacobsen from AECO. Perhaps to start off, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourselves, just for a few seconds. Let's start with Frigg, ladies first.
Yes, thank you, Pat, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I have a 30-year stay in Svalbard behind me, where I have worked with polar tourism for the past, almost the full period. First as manager for what visits Svalbard today. I did that for almost 10 years before I started as the advisor for the governor of Svalbard, the first tourism advisor at the governor's office, until about 15 years ago when I joined AECO. Presently, I live in Tromsø, Norway, with my husband, and also have my children living nearby, adults now. And I have a background educational-wise from tourism, from the Tromsø University, or back then, Finnmark College. Short?
Grand. Thanks very much. And Troels, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. Great to be here, and thanks for the invitation. Yeah, my background is a little bit more like yours, I assume. I am a biologist by education, marine mammal biologist, and I've had some 10 years on ships as guide and expedition leader, some 6 years in operations, product managing operations for one of the companies out there, one of our members. And since a year and a half, I'm field operations manager in AECO. So coming from the ships and having around 18 years of experience in the Arctic and Antarctic, even back in the days when during Pat's tenure in South Georgia. So nice to see him again.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, so what we're going to do this evening, afternoon, morning, or whatever it is, wherever people are around the world. For us, it's quite civilized early evening. Last year we had a little chat with some people from Diato down in the south about the guide level organization and issues that were affecting polar tourism guides. And hopefully we'll ask you a few things this evening about relevant things for the north. So for anyone who wants to ask questions, if you just put them on the chat, and then our technical wizard Lauren, who's lurking around in the background, will gather all the questions and maybe pass them on to us, and I can pass them on. So first thing first, just for newcomers, people who may not be quite up to what AECO is all about, perhaps you could tell us what the structure is of AECO and how it works, and what does it do for guides at the guiding level. Frigg, why don't you start?
Yes, I will start, and I'll say a few words about the general structure before Troels will speak more to what we do on the guide level. But AECO was established a few years later than IATO in 2003, and is an industry membership organization for expedition cruise operators working in the Arctic. The objective for the association is to ensure sustainable and responsible tourism, and to ensure that operations are carried out safely with utmost consideration of the natural environment and cultural domain, as well as communities and regard for communities and people. So, but then also AECO advocate for the members' interest, especially in regulatory issues. We have a secretariat with 7 staff members. They have various backgrounds and various nationalities, and they work from offices in Tromsø and Oslo in Norway, and from Denmark and Greenland. They also have expertise in different fields like environment, community engagement, field operations, administration, communication, and management. So the secretariat handles the daily operations of AECO, such as membership follow-ups, communications, and operations of various resources and tools, and organize events and consultations, and involve with partners, projects, representation, etc., etc. Much of this you will know from Diato as well. AECO has a number of committees and working groups who assist the association, included but not limited to a guidelines committee, a marine committee, a community engagement committee, and working groups for the different geographical areas, as well as for specific projects. Individual members and individuals also involved directly with AECO, and which is often a great resource for the work we do. So while AECO's executive committee has the overall responsibility and overlook the work of AECO Secretariat, it is and will be the annual general meeting, which is the highest deciding body of AECO. So now I'll let Troels take us through a little bit about what we do for the guides. Troels?
Yeah, a very nice handover there. Thanks, Frigg. It's because it's very important to realize that the members, our members, as well as Diato's members, are the operators, not the staff. So whatever work that we do, we work through the operators to reach you. So AECO messages will normally be related via your operator to you as staff. But even though your employer is the member, you guys out there in the field are still really the ones that can ensure that everything that we do, and we work very hard to do here in the Secretariat, is actually implemented. Without your cooperation in that would be totally impossible. So you are extremely important in this regard. So most of what the AECO Secretariat is doing is sort of secondary in some ways to you guys, but very much relevant still. I mean, what have we been doing for the guides directly is, for example, the guidelines. We have some 62 different types of guidelines. These are all tools for you guys to ensure that activities are carried out within the legal framework. That's very important. We have the cruise database. Of course, the scheduler is part of this. Another part of the cruise database is very helpful for us in the Secretariat is gathering statistics. Is extremely important for us, particularly in this time, this day and age. We have the online assessment, which is competence sort of work. I think we may well talk about that a little bit later as well. Of course, we have what we've just recently been working on the last couple of years is the Diato AECO field staff standards, which is a step towards ensuring this minimum level of competency among the field staff. Quite important at this time and this day and age as well. The OVRAT, the off-vessel risk assessment tool, is a tool that we have sort of come online really now this year. It was actually also ready last year, but obviously for obvious reasons it didn't really kick off. Now there's a lot more to that. It's first and foremost, of course, a risk assessment tool for landings, but it's also actually a planning tool. So if you do have access, try and have a look if you haven't had a look already, because it can give you quick access to the sites that we work on and what sort of regulations and things, guidelines, and so on and so forth are in place for each site, which is really helpful in planning and preparing you for the landings. Lots of resources on the website, for example. Even though you can't log on to it, there's still resources in the resources and tools section. We have an annual Polar Field staff conference in collaboration with Diato. We sometimes, well, we hope sometimes in the future when we are allowed to once again come out there and visit field staff training sessions with your employers. We observe, maybe meet you out there at some stage as an observer, and many more things. So lots of the stuff that we provide for you is really to essential for the credibility of the industry, and this is perhaps not always easy to see when you're out there in the field, very busy with keeping passengers happy and organizing landings, etc., etc. But the credibility of the industry lies upon these guidelines that we have in place. So it's very, very important, of course, that these guidelines are followed. So yeah, I think we do lots of stuff for you, actually, also more or less directly, even though we may not communicate with you very directly at lots of the time. You guys are essential. Really,
yeah, great. Thanks very much. Yeah, that's good. Good to know that all that is going on in the background, and yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. You've mentioned we've all mentioned Diato once or twice. Are there any major differences between the two organisations? Sometimes I've heard AECO mentioned as the IATO of the North, but are there any real differences that you would like to share with us between the two organisations and what you have to deal with?
Yeah, I guess I can dig into that one as well, Frigg.
Okay.
It's sort of. I mean, generally speaking, the fundamental idea between IATO and AECO it's the same. It's pretty much the same. We have similar tools and measures. We work together also as sort of sister organizations in many ways, and often. IATO is a little bit different in some ways. For example, they have members that are land-based. AECO is for expedition cruise operators. IATO also have some of the larger cruise ship operators as members. We have a limit to the expedition cruise sector. So another difference is also there's a legal framework difference. IATO works within the treaty parties, and that's a sort of a different ball game than what we work with in our everyday lives in the Secretariat. We work with sovereign nations and sovereign states and their legal framework. So it's a little bit different in that way. And of course, we have an increased focus on community engagement in AECO in the last years, and IATO, of course, has a little bit less of that. So that's probably the major differences. But all in all, it's not all that different, really, in sort of yeah, the fundamental idea behind the whole thing.
Great, thanks. So with all this you're doing, what would you say over the last couple of years, maybe 2-3 years, what have been the major successes, the greatest things that you're most pleased with yourselves of what you've managed to achieve for us?
Yeah,
Frigg, your turn.
Yeah. Do you want to do it, Frigg?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you will be covering what we see as challenges and opportunities moving forward, Pat. But I guess we can start with what we have, what have been over the past years is like AECO has grown significantly. We are now encompassing almost all operators of soulless expedition cruise vessels in the Arctic, which is of significant importance. We've also been the driving force of a very growing and important cross-sector work on search and rescue in the Arctic, gathering most SAR entities across the Arctic in this annual event that has its 5th anniversary this year, and gathering more people every year. We have, of course, this major Clean Seas project, which is a signature project for AECO and which has led AECO into new partnership and arenas. And last but not least, I would perhaps point to our community engagement work, where we are plowing the field in a new area, in a new dimension, and in new ways with new tools, and it's still developing. So this is an area where we will be investing very much more in the future.
Well, that's great. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks. So That's some great stuff you've been doing. And over the next 2 years, what do you think your next biggest challenges are going to be? What are you going to be focusing on for us?
Yeah, one of the major challenges now, as you all know, is of course the COVID-19, and you will have the aftermath after that, and it's taking attention, resources, of course, and it's very, very serious for us and for the industry. But growing tourism and some cruise vessel incidents in the past have created an in general increased attention to the growing cruise tourism in the Arctic, as in Antarctica. But some of the Arctic states and IMO has been initiating and are talking about new regulatory work that may include some challenges for the industry. And I can mention some of these, for instance, stricter regulations related to vessel emissions, discharge and safety, stricter regulations related to wildlife disturbance, typically how to act around polar bears, new regulations related to new activities, including air-based and underwater activities, we'll probably see more of, and new regulations related to field staff competencies, and not at least the new regulations placing larger responsibilities on operators, which is not necessarily a challenge for AECO, because most members of AECO will not have any issues or challenges in meeting some of these requirements, but others may. I think that perhaps of course, then growing tourism in general is an issue that we will have to address moving forward.
Yes, and of course, tourism is much easier to undertake in the north. You're much nearer to a lot of ports than the south, which is a little bit more separated. So I guess there's opportunities for people to operate in the north who are not members of AECO. Is that an issue? Is that a problem? Is there anything you can or do about?
As I said, most or all, I would say at this point, SOLAS operating members, SOLAS vessel operating members are members or are applying membership in AECO. Those with plans for Arctic right now. But there is a group of mainly operators with small vessels who are not members of AECO, and this can create challenges for us in some areas where we as an industry have to both address and work collectively to stand out as a responsible industry. We may have some who are not part of this and not taking the cost of some of this work, and this is of course of concern for those who do. The cost part is perhaps not the most important part, however, because what is with these membership is that you're not only responsible to follow, like for instance, a guideline, but you're responsible to comply with all the requirement of the organization. And if you don't, there is a collective set of eyes on you, where you as member of this community need to answer to whatever it is. And the other side of this is that if something happens, and it has in the past, if it comes down to an accident or an incident that's negative for the industry, we as an association has to answer to this regardless of whether it is a member or not. And that also is about taking the responsibility and taking the cost of this collective the collective needs of the industry. So there are some issues related to having a group that's not members of AECO, but from our understanding, this is not a major issue from the guides in the field, although there has been some issues with the scheduler. We don't hear very many complaints or concerns during the season, but there may be without us knowing.
Oh, great, thanks. Yeah, so it's that's interesting to know. Do you? I guess you know who the other non-members are, do you have good communication with them so that you can have a bit of to and fro about the issues? So at least, do you supply them with information still?
Yes and no. We have some of them are well known and have been around for years. Some come and go, and there are always new ones every year. So it's not so that we have a complete picture. But in Svalbard, there is a way to get the complete picture, and we have an excellent collaboration with the governor. For this reason, have an understanding of the situation. In regards to sharing information, whatever is on our websites that's publicly available is there to use. And we've also made, for instance, these specific guidelines for yacht operators. That's not part of our responsibility in a way, but we saw that the need for information for these operators, members or not, was large. And for that reason, made those guidelines and a website for those travelers to refer to in need of information.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so another question we've been thinking about is there has been quite a bit of discussion occasionally on social media that the guidelines, the site guidelines, are only guidelines and they're not laid down in law. So what would happen if somebody decided that they didn't want to follow them all? What would be the ramifications? What would you do then?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's somewhat surprising to me actually that it sort of comes up. Also because it seems to be, at least from my own experience, that the guidelines in the Antarctica has been accepted totally, and as also as this is what we do and we don't deviate. It's very similar in AECO. I mean, the guidelines have been decided by the membership. So it's your employers that have decided that we have to follow these guidelines in the field, and that in itself has some strength to it, I think. Of course, the guidelines are made so that we ensure that we follow the law. It may not be the law, but in the sense that all members have decided that it's mandatory for their staff to follow the guidelines. Well, then in some ways it is the law. It's not maybe the law of the land, but it's certainly the law of your employer. So it is kind of important. And Frigg also mentioned it before, and that the ramifications of not following guidelines can be rather dramatic with the scrutiny that's on the industry at the moment from authorities and others, and it can lead to consequences for the industry, which can make it a lot harder to operate, and I mean, potentially even a lot stricter than what we're seeing right now in terms of guidelines. So in many ways, one should actually look at it as the law, preferably. Some site-specific guidelines, for example, is the law. I mean, in Svalbard, there are sites in Svalbard where you, as a part of your permit application to sail in Svalbard waters during the season, have to submit a site-specific guideline in order to be able to visit that particular place. And then, as it happens, we have the site-specific guidelines for these places, and our members can submit that site-specific guideline and adhere to those regulations. But that suddenly becomes law, also of law of the land. So if you're not following the site-specific guideline in this particular site, and you have fishermen, rangers, or others out there, it could get ramifications for your company or for yourself. So for not following this, so it's in some ways it is the law. In terms of non-compliance, Frigg also alluded to it just before that there's a lot of peers out there looking, other members, even non-members, but passengers, social media, make mistakes and be sure it's going to come out there one way or the other, and it is looked upon. So if anybody finds out that there has been a misconduct of some sort, it is reported, and there's incident report forms that we get. We have a special committee that handles these things, compliance and Disputes Resolution Committee, and it'll be the case will be worked through very carefully and diligently. And should it be an obvious and case of misconduct, it is a problem for the member, no doubt about it. Not to mention a problem for the entire industry.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So how do the site guidelines get drawn up? Those that are in law, I guess, are drawn up by, say, the Norwegian authorities, or do you at AECO members get together and draw them up and present them to the government and say, hey, how about implementing these? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, a bit more the latter than the former. What the site-specific guidelines are actually quite a detailed bit of work. These are site vulnerability analysis that's been conducted on site by also external experts. It has they may look quite simple, but the work behind it and the documentation behind it, both in terms of flora, fauna, historic sites, is quite a detailed bit of work, and has cost quite a sum of money as well. It's been really difficult, and that's also one of the reasons, of course, that currently we only have site-specific guidelines for most places for the places in Svalbard. We're obviously very keen on getting more, but it's not as easy as it looks or as it sounds. So then it's been written down to a site-specific guideline, but because of the diligent work that lies behind it and the very detailed work that lies behind it, the governor of Svalbard has accepted the use of these for application purposes, for example, and that means also that there's a big benefit for members to be able to use those directly, because if you have to do them yourself and have them approved, it's really very costly work to document that you've done it right.
Yeah, that's so right. That having multiple sets of standards that you've got to adhere to is quite tricky. It's just more stuff to remember, particularly for guides and expedition leaders and the companies. So great that you can work together. Which makes me wonder, is there much difference? I should probably know this anyway, but from one part of the Arctic to another, so going maybe from Canada to Greenland to Iceland, Svalbard, etc. Do you have to do much dealing with different governments and saying, well, your regulations say this and his regulations say that? Can we all sort of come to a sort of single set that would work for everyone?
Perhaps I could address that. I think it's both. There are areas that are very similar and can easily be transferred from one area to another, but there are areas that are very different, and there are legal requirements that can be different. Can be anything from what kind of bear protection is allowed and how can you transport guns, to specifics on distances from wildlife, for instance, and so forth. The most differences we have is in cultural differences, where we in Svalbard, where the majority of the operation finds place, there is no indigenous people, but there is in Greenland and Canada, and there are many aspects of indigenous lands or areas, both in regards to land ownership and involvement and languages and systems that we have to take into consideration in whatever we do. What we have tried to do in the guidelines is to find the balance and to find how can we find a way to encompass all these regards we need to have in one guideline, so that the operators do not need to comply with different guidelines in different areas. And this is an ongoing work. It's a never-ending story. So we have to continue to develop in this area and be ready to address any new issues that may come.
Grand, thanks. And we've just got a question in from Flo, actually. Hi, Flo. Nice to hear from you. She was just saying that AECO, this comes in quite nicely with the idea of talking with a number of regions. She was asking that AECO was traditionally focused on Svalbard very much, just because, as you said, most of the activity was there. Is this changing? Other regions are becoming more popular. Does that mean that for the AECO tools like site guidelines, legal frameworks, what does it mean for that we're visiting more places? That's pretty well, you covered that pretty well, I think, but is there anything extra?
I think it's a good question. Thank you for that question, Flo. And I think it's very correctly observed that AECO has been most concerned with Svalbard since many years, but it also started in Svalbard, and you expanded the association gradually by then including Jan Mayen and Greenland first, and then Canada and National Park Russian Arctic second, and then now lastly with Iceland. And we have gradually entered those areas, and it was not until let me say 2.5 years ago, 3 perhaps, where we were able to expand also the secretariat to a level where we could start the heavy work in these areas. And then COVID-19 has been challenging, not set us back, but it's been challenging in regards to resources. And we perhaps would have hoped to be a bit further into the various developments we have planned for these areas. But I have to say, we now have one person based in Greenland, and we have one Canadian working for AECO who's very into Canadian issues. And the work we have done in Iceland that is about to roll out is significant. And besides this, we are now working to implement these areas more and more into the various tools which Troels earlier presented, like the officer risk assessment and the field staff online assessment, and in other areas. And we're also working with partners in these areas to further develop guidelines and site-specific guidelines included.
Grand, thanks. So going back to Svalbard a little bit, is there anything either of you or both can share with us about the guide standards debate that's currently underway in Norway? They're talking about implementing guide standards there. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what's happening there?
Absolutely, and I can start. I may expect there to be questions in this area, as it is a significant what should I say, development happening, and of huge interest for the guides, of course. What I would like to say is that this guide potential guide requirement is a part of a larger regulatory amendment that is found in place in Svalbard. As I mentioned earlier, with the focus on growing tourism, and also focus on, in fact, on those operators who choose to stand outside the organized part of the tour. It could be with us, could be with the local tourism organization, that they are looking into ways to safeguard the safety in tourism and the environment in Svalbard, of course, but also the interest of the local community. And for that reason, there are many regulatory issues going on. For the guide certification in particular, this is, as some will know, has been going on for some time, and AECO has been heavily involved and also addressed this in several documents that are publicly available, some of them in Norwegian, but where one can see how we are pushing for this to be aligned with what we otherwise have discussed in the industry with Diato and within the community, what could be a potential level of requirements for guides. And we also then push for the recognition of existing competences and also then the opportunity to reach this competence level by using courses, educations, or other places in the world, and also gaining experience in not only other polar regions, but in general. There are many experiences that could be relevant in this regard. last week there was a major meeting with two ministers in Norway that are involved in this work now, where many stakeholders had been invited. And for us, it seems that they are listening to the stakeholders and they are taking all concerns into consideration. We don't know where this leads yet, but we are we're determined to do our best to influence this in the best possible way, both for our members, the operators, but also for the guides, because we don't think there is a difference between the interest in this question right now.
Grand, thanks. Troels, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I mean, if anything, I was attending this meeting as well, and I think it was encouraging to hear that most of the participants at that meeting were in a similar sort of line as the AECO line. So I think it was in that sense a very positive meeting. But I mean, let's see, what happens. It's hard to say at the moment. It's very, very high level, as you can hear Frigg saying. It's top government level, and we certainly not. This is a big priority. The whole legislation review of legislation in Svalbard has, I can tell you, taken a lot of Frigg's time and will take a lot of Frigg's time in the future as well.
Well, it's much appreciated, all the efforts you're putting in on our behalf. Obviously, the PTGA has got a big interest. The whole organisation was set up, the whole point of it was having recognised that we needed to have some standards and that they needed to be independent of operators so that guiding could be of a similar standard, whichever company it was, whether you're on a little yacht or a big boat, or if you're moving from one to another. And so having a standard that can be independently assessed is really important. So it's great that you guys are supporting that. Not necessarily just PTGA, there are other organisations, but the principle that it's important to have a good standard, and maybe, yeah, well, hopefully the government were listening. Then it sounds like you had a good positive talk, and if they were listening, they might have grasped some more. Did you think that did you feel that they got a better idea of the sort of things that they were going to need to be considering?
Yeah, to be frank, I think that the Norwegian government, especially the governor of Svalbard and the Ministry of Justice, is quite well aware of AECO's work and the level of the standards we have in this association. They're also well aware that the association is, in fact, covering some of the tasks that the government would have to take over if we didn't exist. And they're giving us very positive feedback on what we do, and also many signs of the importance of keeping it up. And for this reason, I think we are in position to influence this quite a lot. And from the first proposal to this last proposal, it has come a long way, and we recognize our own inputs in this new proposal to a large extent.
Well, that's really good news. For those of us who glance at social media from time to time, there's been a bit of a vacuum, I think, of information about what they're thinking, and people are worrying that they're going to implement something completely unthought through and impractical, and that means yet another set of stuff for us to learn on top of what we already do. So it's really good. I'm glad to hear, and I'm sure all the other guides are glad to hear that there are that you are able on our behalf to open their eyes a bit and get them on board, and the journey that they're making, get it for them to get it right, so that that has more credibility, and if it's got credibility, then it will be the guides and the companies will be more open to implementing it and getting that right too.
Yes, I think you're very, very right. But it's also, I think it's important to realize that this kind of work doesn't happen overnight. It comes with years of working targeted for a general responsibility and showing that we are worth the trust, so to speak, and that we showing that we really know what we're talking about, and also demonstrating in this case the competency in the industry, and not at least among the guides. I think one thing that has been difficult to get completely across in regards to information is exactly that. Who are these people? How competent are they? And that's I know, because I've been working in this for a long time, but I didn't know when I, for instance, started with the governor's office after having worked in tourism in Svalbard in almost 10 years. I still didn't know before I started there what competency was in the expedition cruise industry, and I think that's the case with many stakeholders that we think we know, but we do not necessarily. And we as an industry, and you as guides, have to be good at communicating the message, and also in a good manner.
Yes, that is very important. I worked for the South Georgia government for very many years, and all we really knew about tourism was the ships turned up, came ashore, wandered around the museum and went off, and people within the government structure didn't really have a grasp of what went on within the industry and how the ships were organized. And we were charged with the responsibility of looking after a very, very special place with a lot of things that could easily go wrong. And it was very tempted to screw right down and control everything and say, you can't go here. And then I started working in the industry 3 or 4 years ago, and I was flabbergasted with how much education, how much regulation, how much responsibility individual guides, expedition leaders, the companies, the ship's operations, how much was involved in making sure we all got right. And I sometimes cringe to think of the stuff on South Georgia that we were trying to tell these people that they knew so much more about than us. So yeah, I'm really glad to see that you're being listened to. That's great. Well, we've got a couple of questions in. Yes, do you think other countries are going to follow on from Norway and also sort of start requiring guide certification?
It's difficult to say. I would like to mention that we work in different ways in different areas. In Canada, for instance, we've been working with the government of Nunavut on a specific. We have a memorandum of understanding with the government of Nunavut, where we are committed to work with them in their own Inuit guide training, in the way that we as an organization guarantee for up to 12 practitioners every year on board the vessels. And I think that's more the way it's going to be in Canada than perhaps to ask for specific requirements from external guides. And in Greenland, we've been working closely with the Campus Quislik, which is the guide training center in south of Greenland, where we've been lecturing through this pandemic, and also helped them with areas of competence they didn't have, and also organized this. Well, we called it a guide pitch, but it's not a pitch. It was a meeting between operators and the guides, where the local guides, where they could get to know each other, potentially connect for work on board vessels. And I think that's the future for many of the areas with indigenous people that and with locals engaged in tourism, that we as an industry and the operators need to make room for those local employees, in addition to the ones that they carry when they arrive. You're muted, Pat.
Yes, how lucky. I bet Troels wished all those years that he could have just switched me off from time to time. Question from Lizzie is, recently there have been a number of new entrants into polar cruising, often from mainstream cruise companies that perhaps don't have an expedition cruising background. This could be an issue in terms of guiding standards. She's also concerned that often these companies use quite big ships with high passenger numbers. Does AECO have any plans or any power to try to restrict or reduce the operations of these new operators? And to try and reduce the impact on the ecosystems that they're visiting? Is that something you can get into?
I can try and do, maybe if we can take over in a little bit, but I can try and do some of it at least. I've been working quite a lot with recently with sort of vessel intelligence and growth and what are we expecting in the future, where are we, our members going, etc., etc. And indeed, as Frigg also mentioned, that we have a number of new members, a number of members that are operators that are trying to become members at the moment, and some of them are indeed these well-known cruise companies. But the vessel sort of new builds and entries into the market do actually indicate that we're going to stay at an average passenger number of around 200, even when the last new expedition cruise ship, the custom-made expedition cruise ship, is being built in 2024. I mean, we're looking at a quite steep growth curve right now in the next couple of years. But as it looks right now, the last one is actually being in order, and the order books is in 2024. So 2023 even. 2022 to 2023 is actually only one being built. So passenger-wise, it's probably going to be reasonably similar as it is right now. I don't think we're going to get a vast increase of big vessels. Nothing indicates that. Nothing that's bigger than what we have now. I think there's a limit to size as well when we are talking expedition cruising. There are operators that are sort of traditionally right now working with, say, 1,000 passenger vessels, but their entry into the expedition cruise market is with 400 passenger vessels. So they're not bringing the 1,000 passenger vessels up to do expedition cruising in the Arctic, for example. So it is totally a legit question and a good question about standards, and it's of course also one of the reasons why the industry and hence AECO wants to try and secure and are very much for the fact that we should have a certain standards to guides, because of course with increased number of vessels, there's also an increased number of guides needed. It's the same discussion going on in Diato, exactly the same. And we're trying to do our best to be able to accommodate the vessels and actually have both enough experience and enough qualification on board, even with the growth. But it is a challenge. I'm sort of, in terms of the Arctic and AECO only, I think I'm very optimistic about it. All else equal, we have a very, very large area, and if the ideas that we've been putting forward towards, for example, the Norwegian consultancy there on the legislation last week, for example, which was in many ways similar as the PTJ, for example, and Visit Svalbard, for example, if that sort of sentiment would be listened to, I believe that we have a good chance of making that happen, because we're such a large area. And there is all else equal, enormous amount of people living in these areas that have expertise and have, educational background, experience background. So I'm reasonably optimistic about being able to keep it that way. I don't know if you wanna address the power question.
No, I think it's a very good question, and to the point of what maybe be the concern of many authorities too, and that's hence the new regulations in some areas. I think it is the concern is perhaps greater than the expected growth, but what Troels describes is a future where the larger expedition cruise vessels, and then we're talking 300 to 500 perhaps, may be a handful, whereas the major growth is within a smaller sized group. And when new requirements such as guide certifications and perhaps other operators' requirements, together with the already existing limitations in Eastern Svalbard, or the request for a pilot exemption of certificates, and so forth, this is likely manageable for many years.
Oh, that's very good to hear. Yeah, that, again, it's just people worry and have the questions, but when we have discussions and get information back, and you're particularly to know that we're not going to have a whole string of 1,500 passenger ships disgorging into Longyearbyen. That's well, apart from the shopkeepers, but that will keep it more manageable.
I could add a little thing, if I may.
Yeah, please do.
Just because it's something that that you guys may not be thinking about very much, but it's something that authorities are thinking about, and especially in terms of safety at sea and things. It's not actually the passenger numbers, but the people on board number. And one of the features about the new vessels being built, a number of them, is that they are actually quite large, and they're also in terms of physical size, but not in terms of passenger numbers. But additionally, they have quite a lot of crew on board. So the people on board number is increasing, though the passenger numbers is staying pretty much so stable. And this is where our work comes in as well, when we are talking and consulting with stakeholders and authorities and things to address these things in terms of a safety perspective. So there's sort of details behind everything. So even if it's a very large ship nowadays, it actually, I mean, when I started out in this business, it was not that large ships and with that few people, I can tell you. And nowadays it's going to be sometimes very large vessels with quite, relatively speaking, few people on board.
Yes, yeah, you're right. It's certainly, yeah, the days of a little ship with the expedition leader serving the passengers at the table because he's the only one there to do it. Those are long gone. But yeah, well, that's all been very interesting. So yeah, another question is, let's move on to something a little bit different for a while. The Field Staff Assessment Program. Every guide likes that session where you sit down and you've got the assessment to do and the online quiz to do. Tick, tick, tick. Yeah, I've missed that this year. That was a shame. Hopefully COVID will go away and we'll be back into that. So how much changes from year to year with the field staff assessments, and what's your input into that?
Yeah, that's on my desk as well. The field staff assessment it's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Everybody hates it when they start looking at it the very first time, and then they realize it may not be quite as bad. I hope that you realize it's not quite as bad. And indeed, our field staff assessment has been designed with very specific sort of references and things in mind, so that it's not an exam. It's not supposed to be an exam. It's supposed to be an awareness test. You're supposed to have your mind refreshed about issues year on year, and that's what it's all about. It's why there's no time limit. There, you can fail almost as many times as you like, and you can write me and I can get you back on and you can go again. So it's really about preparing yourself for the season. It's all about preparation, being in the best possible place to conduct your work, as you should, and in the best possible way. And of course, it's updated. It's made in a way where we have a pool of questions for each region, and of course for AECO. And a number of those questions are randomly picked to go into your test. It's a random pick, which is also why, if any of you guys have ever written me about the questions on a test, that I really, really appreciate if you give me the question ID number and not just the number on the question in your test, because that's going to change depending on the next test. Is going to be different. But anyway, so we're updating these questions as we can. So you may find that it's not very many new questions or anything coming in. There is a certain shuffle every time you start up a new test. There is a shuffle. When that is said, we are updating it whenever new legislation's coming in, whenever things come up that can warrant a new question, it is being added to it. I'm currently working on trying to collect enough documentation to make enough questions for a Canadian test and also an Icelandic test. Let's see how we fare with that, so that we can complete the picture. So I think it's a great benefit to staff to keep updated, it's really not that hard as you would think it for the first time. It's, everything is harder the first time. And a second thing or third thing is that it's really has huge signal value. The fact that we have this test in place has been, it shows that staff take it seriously, that our members take it seriously. And being able to say that we have this test in place, that it's mandatory for our members, has really been valuable when we're talking with authorities, for example, on guide certification in Svalbard, etc. It's extremely valuable to have.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Yes, it's good to have it underlined. It's not just something that we need to know, but it's a great thing to be able to show the wider community, all those people who are looking at us as an industry and saying, why are you going there? What are you doing in this special place? And to be able to say, well, we're taking people there, making them fall in love with it. And this is everything that we're doing to make sure that we don't have a negative impact. That you're quite right. That is a really useful thing. Right. Well, let's just have one last question. I managed to keep you going for nearly an hour now. We know you've been working hard to get safe travel going again, hopefully soon in the way of post-COVID. Are you able to share at all what you've been doing, what strategies are gaining traction, what's working, what's maybe not working, and how are things looking? Is the situation starting to look a bit difficult, a bit different for next year, or even later this year?
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for asking. You're absolutely right. It's been a major area of work for AECO, this pandemic. We worked along different lines. First of all, we worked with the industry now to develop measures to control infection control measures, and in this area also the Clean Ship Healthy People working group has been a great effort for AECO. They have developed guidelines for the expedition cruise operators to use, and they have been well received in by many stakeholders. We also work with different authorities, both in regards to the legal framework when it comes to COVID-19 regulations and as partner for national infection control guidelines. And we have worked with industry partners on mutual efforts and pushes towards reopening or going back to travel again. But not at least, we have worked with our members, with authorities, and with project partners to keep AECO alive, because AECO did not have a big bank account when this started, and for us it's been a big focus to find ways to manage, and we've done that by downscaling the secretariat, by taking on some new projects, and also worked in areas where we traditionally do not work, and we've been able to hang in there, and we're hanging in there now, quite good, but there is no guarantee for the future, so this is still a priority for AECO. Many tasks and many efforts, but still very little operation. However, we see light in the tunnel, and right now we're looking at the careful startup in Iceland, and perhaps later this season or late season in Svalbard. That hasn't been decided yet, so there is still an opening, perhaps, and perhaps also for smaller vessels in Greenland later in the season. No guarantees, but these are the small openings we see or hopes we have. And we could have wished for more, of course, but it's not in AECO's interest to push for anything that is not justifiable when it comes to risk of health and life. So we have to find a balance between the industry needs and the needs in general.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you're quite right. I think you're right to be reasonably cautious, because if we rush into something, then it all goes wrong. That will set things back for a long time. So yeah, I think I'm glad I'm not you, having to juggle all these things. So well done, and thanks very much for all that you've been doing in that. Troels, have you got anything else you would add to that?
Well, not so much really. It's just that it's really devastating, and we're very, very much aware of how devastating this period of time has been for staff as well. I can only begin to imagine, but we just really, really hope that you're hanging in there. There is light at the end of the tunnel. We will start again eventually, and when we start, there will be. I mean, all that the market tells us right now is that there will be a decent, a really good rebound. So there will be work out there for you guys. So hang in there and go into your assessment, even though you don't have any work this summer, for example, or just to keep you updated. Check out the OBAT, my little baby there. Do that. It's great.
Oh, brilliant! Thanks very much, Troels. Yes, I'll go and have a look at that later this evening. Well, that's plenty of time gone past. So thank you very, very much, both of you, for your time, Troels and Frigg from AECO, and keep up the good work. And let's talk again sometime. It's been very illuminating, and I hope that all the guides watching have learned a little bit more and got a bit more of an idea.
You're muted, Pat.
Yeah. So thanks very much, and hopefully everything will sort itself out in time. So I'd also like to thank very much to Lauren, who's working in the background and is feeding the questions through and reminding me when I'm muted. And so that's it for pretty well this week. Next week, this is part of a longer series, so we're trying to get something together every week for the next month or so. So watch this space, and we'll see what happens next.
Thank you so much, Pat and Lauren. Thank you, PTTA.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks.